Welcome to the deep dive. I want you to just take a second and picture this. It's August 3rd, 1977. You're in a Senate hearing room. Senator Kennedy stands up and he starts talking about uh, chilling testimony about human experimentation activities of the Central Intelligence Agency. He mentions covert drug tests on unwitting citizens at all social levels, high and low, Native Americans and foreign. Think about that. Not theory, not speculation. Real people.
It really hits you, doesn't it? That phrase, unwitting citizens. It wasn't just abstract policy. It was about individuals whose lives were directly impacted without their knowledge.
Exactly. And that's what we're digging into today, Project MKULTRA. It was the CIA's top secret program officially for research and behavioral modification. So our mission here is to unpack what came out of that 1977 Senate hearing and, related history. We're going to explore the unbelievable scope, the really disturbing methods, and the questions about intelligence ethics that still linger today. You'll hear how some hidden documents, found almost by accident, brought new facts to light in what they tell us.
And if you step back, look at the big picture. This wasn't just contained within the CIA. We're talking about a program that networked out into universities, hospitals, even used private citizens. And crucially, often without anyone knowing the CIA was involved, let alone consenting to be part of an experiment. They were pushing boundaries, all right, but maybe not in a good way.
So where did this whole mind control idea even come from? We need to rewind to the early 50s. The Cold War is really heating up.
Right, the atmosphere was thick with suspicion, paranoia even.
And the CIA kicks off this research. Interestingly, it was approved by Alan Dulles, the director then, just 3 days after he publicly slammed Soviet tactics.
Yeah, the timing is something else. It definitely points to this deep anxiety about what the Soviets or others might be doing. Brainwashing techniques. Things like the Cardinal Mindstenti trial in Hungary probably fueled those fears. They were afraid of falling behind.
So it started defensively, like let's figure out what they might do to us.
Well, that seems to have been the initial justification. Yes, understanding potential threats. But that focus shifted pretty quickly, actually. The agency started looking at offensive uses, how they could use the covert use of biological and chemical materials. They were thinking about controlling individuals, maybe even, enabling assassinations. It went way beyond defense.
And this wasn't totally out of the blue, right? There were earlier projects.
Exactly. And culture didn't just spring up fully formed. You can trace its roots back to things like Project Artichoke. That one got renamed in '51. It specifically looked at offensive interrogation techniques, hypnosis, drugs, the works.
What's interesting there is the mention of them being conducted, at least initially, under medical and security controls.
Medical and security controls. That sounds reassuring, but maybe it wasn't always the case.
Well, it suggests some initial structure, perhaps. Artichoke involved experiments, testing drug and hypnosis combos for interrogation, but it definitely shows that shift from just studying the enemy to actively developing their own offensive capabilities. That's a key step towards MKULTRA. Okay, so MKULTRA itself. You said it was an umbrella project. What does that actually mean in practice?
It means it was huge. It ran from 53 to 64, roughly.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just one research track. It funded, get this, 149 numbered sub-projects, each one potentially exploring different angles on drugs and behavioral modification. It covered a massive range of methods.
149 sub-projects. That's enormous.
It is. And the really chilling part, the part Senator Kennedy highlighted, was the widespread use of unwitting subjects. He specifically said covert drug tests on unwitting citizens at all social levels, high and low, Native Americans and foreign Olin. That wasn't just a one-off. It involved things like giving LSD to people in social situations without them knowing, just to see what happened.
Wow. And who were these people? Were they targeting specific groups?
They were. The documents show experiments on incredibly vulnerable populations. We're talking mentally impaired boys at a state school, American soldiers, some volunteers, some apparently not, and even people identified as sexual psychopaths in state hospitals. The records are quite blunt, saying prisoners were especially good subjects. Why? Because they might consent for perks like extra recreation time or commuted sentences.
That's just deeply exploitative, using people's circumstances against them.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just random acts. There was this meeting, you mentioned it earlier, at a cabin in Maryland, November '53. 10 scientists got together, and they explicitly agreed that an unwitting experiment would be desirable to really test LSD's potential. That meeting basically greenlit the unethical approach for much of what followed. It wasn't an accident, it was policy.
And this policy had devastating real-world consequences. Let's talk about Dr. Frank Olson.
Yes, the Olson case is perhaps the most infamous and tragic example. He was an Army civilian scientist. In November 1953, shortly after that cabin meeting actually, he attended another meeting of researchers. And there, he was apparently given LSD without his knowledge. Part of an experiment.
Unwittingly dosed by his own colleagues.
Exactly.
Yeah,
About a week later, he leaped to his death from a hotel room window in New York City.
just horrific. And the CIA's reaction?
Well, this is also quite revealing. They made, quote, substantial efforts to make sure his family got death benefits. But crucially, they did not notify the Olsons of the circumstances surrounding his demise. They actively worked to cover it up, to disconnect the deaths from the CIA and provide complete cover for everyone involved.
So, hush money and a cover-up, essentially.
Pretty much. Even Director Dulles later criticized Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who ran many of these programs, for the unwitting application of the drug. Dulles mentioned the lack of medical collaboration and proper consideration of the rights of the individual. But, that criticism came too late for Dr. Olson.
And this wasn't just happening in secret labs or military bases, was it? These unwitting tests happened out in public.
Right. They operated safe houses, basically CIA-run apartments in places like San Francisco and New York City for nearly a decade. That's where a lot of the unwitting drug testing took place. There was one infamous project called Operation Midnight Climax. It involved setting up bedrooms in a San Francisco safe house in 1955. George White from the Federal Bureau of Narcotics oversaw it. The FBI acted as a cutout, a layer of deniability.
Midnight Climax sounds like something out of a spy movie, using narcotics agents as cover.
It really does, and it shows the lengths they went to. But MKULTRA wasn't just about LSD or hallucinogens. That's important to remember. The sub-projects explored all sorts of things: effects of electroshock, harassment techniques, even studying extrasensory perception. They looked into gas-propelled sprays and aerosols, sabotage methods for crops.
Sabotage, ESP. It sounds like they were throwing everything at the wall.
It seems that way. One sub-project, number 149, did realistic tests using human cadavers and a special blackjack device to study brain concussions. Another, sub-project 45, tested chemical agents, like knockout materials, on advanced cancer patients. The scope was incredibly broad and often deeply disturbing.
And through all this, they managed to keep it secret for so long. You mentioned deniability, but how did they hide the funding, the connections?
Well, first, the most drastic step, destroying the evidence. In January 1973, the CIA director at the time, Richard Helms, ordered the destruction of almost all MKULTRA records. That act alone made it, as the Senate report later said, impossible to determine the full range and extent of the program. And it also meant they couldn't possibly find and help everyone who might have been harmed.
Destroying the files, that's a huge step. But before that, how did they manage the money trail?
Very cleverly, using intermediary funding mechanisms, basically cutouts. This let them fund top researchers, sometimes without the researchers even knowing the CIA was their sponsor. There's one example, Subproject 35. The CIA gave $375,000 to a private medical institution for a new building. It looked like a private donation, which then got matched by federal funds. The institution had no idea where the initial money really came from.
So the institution thinks it's getting a private grant, maybe matched by the government, but the CIA is secretly pulling the strings.
Exactly. And it saved them money, too, avoided the usual government overhead costs. But the main point was deniability. As one document put it, agency sponsorship would be completely deniable since no connection would exist between the university and the agency. They deliberately bypassed normal procedures, avoided contracts, because qualified people were wary of signing anything linking them to this kind of work.
It sounds like a system designed for secrecy above all else. Did this cause friction, say, between the CIA and the military?
Oh, definitely. There were constant turf wars and jurisdictional conflicts. Military groups doing similar tests sometimes withheld info from the CIA and vice versa. For instance, the Army had its own LSD testing projects like Third Chance and Derby Hat, sometimes on unwitting soldiers, apparently without telling the CIA or FBI. The CIA even tried to sneakily find out what the Army was up to. It wasn't a picture of smooth cooperation.
Okay, so after all this unethical research, all this secrecy and risk, what did they actually find out? Did they discover the truth serum everyone imagines from movies?
Well, that's one of the big takeaways, the whole idea of a magical truth serum. It's pretty much a myth. The research, including MKULTRA's findings, showed that while certain drugs like barbiturates might lower inhibitions, make someone talk more, the output is totally unreliable. It's often contaminated by deception, fantasy, garbled speech, etc. You don't get clean, reliable truth.
So it doesn't really force the truth out of someone?
Not reliably, no. And critically, the research also found that people can resist drug interrogation. Both normal individuals and psychopaths, especially if they're trained or mentally prepared to resist ordinary intense questioning. And guess what the best aid to a defense was? Knowing what drug you've been given and how it works. Foreknowledge helps you resist.
Interesting. So knowing is half the battle, even against these drugs. What about the hallucinogens, like LSD? What was their role, if not truth?
Those drugs, mescaline, marijuana, LSD, were found to distort the perception and interpretation of sensory input. They were used more to disorient people to create experimental psychotic states, potentially making them more vulnerable or suggestible rather than specifically for truth extraction.
And you mentioned physical methods, too, like blackjacks.
Yes, beyond drugs, they explored physical impacts, methods of producing shock and concussion, including that pancake-type blackjack, and even using blast waves. The goal there seemed to be inducing amnesia or maybe causing brain damage, brain concussion.
It's all pretty grim. There's one other odd detail in the documents. Magician's art. What on earth was that about?
Right, it sounds strange, but it wasn't about stage magic. It referred to techniques for surreptitious administration. Or, as Admiral Turner later put it quite bluntly at the hearing, how to slip the Mickey into the Fen. How to secretly drug someone.
Ah, sleight of hand for drugging people. Got it. Okay, let's jump forward to 1977 and those Senate hearings. How did all this start to come out? You mentioned found documents.
Yes, this is a crucial moment. In March 1977, an employee at a record center, Mr. Lobinger, stumbled upon 7 boxes, about 8,000 pages of MKULTRA documents that everyone thought had been destroyed in '73. They survived because they were mistakenly filed with budget and fiscal records, not in the main project files that Helms had ordered destroyed. Pure luck, really.
Wow. What was in those boxes?
A goldmine of information that had been missing. Names of researchers, 185 non-government researchers and assistants. Names of institutions, 80 institutions involved. That included 44 colleges and universities, 15 research foundations, 12 hospitals, 3 prisons, and crucially, confirmation that many of these people and places had no idea the CIA was behind the funding. It laid bare the network.
So this discovery really fueled the 1977 hearings. What was the CIA's position when confronted with this new evidence?
Well, Admiral Stansfield Turner, who was the DCI then, testified. He stated that the MKULTRA programs were long over 12 to 25 years in the past. He assured the committee that no experimentation with drugs on human beings, witting or unwitting, was being conducted in any way by the CIA at that time. He drew a line saying current behavioral research was just about assessment like polygraphs, not modifying behavior.
But was the committee satisfied? Did they feel they got all the answers, especially about who was responsible?
Not entirely. Senator Kennedy, for one, was quite frustrated. He pointed out that Sidney Gottlieb, the guy who seemed to run MKULTRA, whose name was on almost every document, hadn't been re-interviewed about this new material. Kennedy really pushed for that. He wanted details. The drugs that were administered, the volume of drugs, how it was administered. Admiral Turner did commit to questioning Gottlieb further.
What about the victims, the unwitting subjects, the researchers who didn't know? Was there talk of notifying them?
There was. Admiral Turner acknowledged a moral obligation to protect the reputations of researchers who were duped, and a legal obligation under the Privacy Act regarding subjects. But he also expressed a real dilemma, particularly about notifying universities publicly. He worried it might damage their reputations more than help. He agreed to consult with university presidents on how to handle it. It was complex.
And the big question, could something like MKULTRA happen again?
Turner seemed to think it was very, very unlikely. He pointed to increased awareness, better oversight procedures within the CIA, and also the potential for whistleblowers inside the agency. The idea that someone would speak up now if such things were proposed.
So wrapping this up, we've journeyed through this really dark chapter, Project MKULTRA, a program born out of Cold War fear, which ultimately trampled on individual rights and scientific ethics in the name of national security. And we saw how uncovering lost documents, decades later, could reignite the search for truth.
Absolutely. And if there's one key takeaway for you listening, it's got to be about the vital need for oversight, for transparency, for strong ethical guardrails, especially when powerful institutions get involved in sensitive fields like behavioral science. It really underscores that old saying about knowledge being power and the need for critical thinking about how that power is used.
Right. And that leaves us with something to chew on, a final thought, perhaps. Given this legacy of secrecy, the harm caused, what responsibilities do governments and scientists still have today? Not just to prevent future MKULTRAs, but maybe to address the broken trust. How do we, as a society, balance that ongoing tension between the need for security and the fundamental requirement of human dignity, even when looking back decades later? What does that history mean for how you think about state power and your rights today?